everyone. Good evening and welcome to the fourth session for the Phase 2 for the React and React Native Developers Bootcamp, Cohort 5 2025. I'm glad to have you all here. Today we're going to be looking at a very important concept, which is how your React or your React Native application can be able to connect or communicate with an external system using API calls, making API calls. And for today, we have one of our amazing community members who has lots of experience with building web and mobile applications. I'm talking here about Engineer Karl, the one of the co-founders of Fapshi, and he's going to be working with us through how to use how to make API calls, because this is what you're going to be using a lot during your projects, to communicate with the back end and execute your project. So please pay attention. We're going to have 1 hour of him explaining, and you can definitely ask some questions in the midst of it, but then there's going to be a 30 minutes Q&A after that. Without much ado, please, as usual, let us post our hands together, our emojis together. Let's see some emojis as we welcome Engineer Karl. Engineer, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer Martin. I celebrate and appreciate you for that very warm welcome. I greet everyone especially. Please, if you are celebrating me, I appreciate it. Can we put it up for the boss himself, Mr. Martin? I mean, this is a very incredible opportunity that you have. It's very rare to have people with a heart for others, to grow others, to groom others, like Engineer Martin does. Him reaching out to me to be able to extend my expertise to you all is very serious proof about how much he loves you and how much he wants you to learn. So please, if you're very appreciative of that, let's now give it up for him, please. Those emojis should pop up much more than they pop up for me now. Please.
Thank you very much. I'm honored.
I'm not sure everyone on this call is fired up for tonight. Maybe I should increase my volume.
I think to optimize bandwidth, you can just turn off your video so that we optimize bandwidth for the other.
All right.
Yes, Cameroon and internet.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I was going to come to that. I really appreciate you for saving me from that.
No problem. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much. Once again, good evening to everyone. Mr. Martin, I really appreciate this opportunity to share what I have with everyone aboard. Please, I don't know if everyone has the right to unmute their mic or if it's going to be necessary for them to do so at some point so that I get feedback when I'm teaching. But if that's not possible, comments in the chats will be very necessary. Very necessary, just so that I have feedback from what I'm saying. So, I don't know if I'm supposed to introduce myself again, but I'm Karl. I'm principally a front-end engineer. I've been doing front-end engineering for close to 8 years. And by the grace of God, I've been privileged to work on several projects. And tonight, I just want to share with you all on the topic which Sir Martin emphasized that would be very helpful to you all. And it's API calls and state management. I want to believe that prior to this, you've had some introduction to certain concepts that are fundamental to your understanding of the topic which I'm going to be writing on tonight. So please, it's very important that you pay attention. I believe because of the time, we may not be able to code along together. When I say code along,
guys, is it only my network that he's breaking, or Can someone not see him
I
breaking?
mean that you may not be able to also type on your machine, just like I would be typing on my machine. But that should not stop you from following. I have already gone ahead to, implement something so that we don't spend too much time. But I'm going to do justice to explain everything that I'm going to be showing you line by line. So tonight, just permit me share my screen here so that you get.
Carl, seems you're breaking. Hello, Carl. Carl, it seems you're breaking. We cannot really. Oh, okay. Welcome to Cameroon. So he left the call. I think his network is a bit unstable. Let's give him some time. Hopefully, he's able to sort that out and rejoin the call.
Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? I'm very sorry for the network glitches. I have switched to a different provider, so I believe should be good now.
Yeah, I think this is
All right.
better. Thank you.
Thank you for the confirmation. So before I left, I don't know at what level I left, but I was saying that because of the time, we may not be able to put together, but I have gone ahead to implement something. I'm going to show you an aperture of what we'll be implementing tonight. I believe so much in learning by doing, and I believe that Sir Martin also does the same, which is why he requested that there should be practical. So everything we're going to be doing here will be live practicals, and I'm just going to show you very briefly what we're going to be doing, and then I believe that that should give you an idea of what we'll be implementing. I will do my best to explain every single line of code, and if time permits, then we'll implement a few more things. So just to show you what we are going to be doing tonight, permit me share my screen. If you can see my screen, please let me know. All right, awesome. So what you have on the is what is the app visible enough? Do I have to zoom in a bit? This is the app on the left. Is it visible enough? Hi, saying that I need to zoom in a bit.
Yes, Karl, can you zoom in a little more? Whoops.
Okay. Yeah. Let me try that. Okay, for the code, I think I can zoom in a little more.
Yes.
Is this okay?
It's not seeming to change on my side. Is it zooming on anybody's side?
For the code, is this okay?
Okay. Yes, it's okay. I think you're having a lag.
Yes, there seems to be a lag. That's definitely because of the. But the app is visible enough, right?
Yes, I think we can see the code now. I think you can go ahead with the code now.
All right, thank you very much. So just to give some sort of, I don't know if I should call it the syllables but the goal of this session, what I mean is by the end of this, you should be able to know what an API is at a practical level. You should know how to fetch data from an API. You should understand how promises work. I'm also assuming that you have basic knowledge of JavaScript. So when I mention promises, you understand what I mean by promises. You should know how to store API data in state, which is where we're going to talk about state management. You should also know how to display data that you have fetched from the API in your JSX or TSX, based on whether you're using JavaScript or TypeScript. You should also know when and why to use the different HTTP methods. So for tonight, we are looking at a REST API. Because of time, I may not be able to really go deep into what a REST API is, but just as a way of introduction, an API is a way for your app to talk to a server. So usually when we talk about servers, we are referring to the back end, right? So a lot of times we hear this guy is the back end developer, this guy is the front end developer. So when we talk about the back end, we are talking about everything that has to do with the logic and the management of the data of that app. The front end deals with everything that the user is going to use. So what you present in front of the user, which is what we call the user interface, is part of the front end. And then you also have the user experience, which constitutes work that is done by both the front end and the back end to make sure that when someone is using the app, the experience is optimal. So it's the best, right? So that's why you have UI, UX design. All of that is part of front end engineering. So for tonight, we are looking at front-end engineering. So we are going to use an API that has already been built so that we are not doing back-end engineering, right? So back-end engineering will be what you would use to create the API. So the API provides some kind of a route, so much so that you can be able to communicate between the front end and the back end. And that back end sometimes involves the database as well. So where you're storing your data, you have to build some sort of route or a road, so much so that the front end can discuss or communicate with the back end. When we talk about that, we are referring to the API. So the API is that road. So for tonight, we are going to be building a to-do app. So the work that we are going to do is that we are going to build a UI like the one which you see here, right? And this UI is going to communicate with an API that has already been built. Now, that API has what we call routes. So a route is a particular way through which you can communicate with the backend to either send or receive data, right? So you communicate with the backend through an API to either send or receive data. So we already have that API. It's the dummy json.com. So it has already already filled to-dos. So you have to-do items that have already been filled for you in a database. and we are going to be consuming the endpoints that will permit us to fetch those to-dos. We are also going to consume endpoints that will permit us, and we'll consume an endpoint that will permit us to add a new to-do. We'll consume an endpoint that will permit us to delete a to-do. We'll consume an endpoint that will permit us to edit a to-do. So when we talk about this, we are talking about CRUD operations. So create, read, update, and delete. That's if time permits. But if time does not permit, we are only going to do create and edit. Okay? So let's jump right into it. I'm sorry that I'm not presenting my slides to you, but maybe at the end, I'm going to give you my notes. I'm going to give you my notes so that you can use it for reference later on. So the idea here is we want to create an app like this so much so that you can be able to create a to-do item. You can be able to see all of the to-do items that are already there, that have already been created. Okay, so that's the first thing that we're planning to do here. But before I go into that, I should explain to you some of the concepts that we will use. So let me just pull this up here. Maybe that will help so that I don't talk from space. You should not feel like it's too strange. Okay. If you can see this and it's zoomed in enough, you let me know, please. If it's not zoomed in enough, you also indicate so that I should increase the fonts. All right. So remember, there are a few concepts that you should understand. The very first of them is, if I have an API and I'm saying that for me to communicate between the front end and the back end, I'm supposed to use a route, right? What do I want to achieve with the API? That's a good question. What do I want to achieve with the API? The API permits you to achieve a few things, but you can summarize those things under what we call CRUD operations. So CRUD operations, CRUD is just permit me right here, CRUD. So CRUD operations. So C stands for create. Create means I want, in this case of this app, it means I want to add a to-do item on my list. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is the R. R means I want to read. So I want to get all of the to-do items that are in the database, or some. So it will not always be all. Sometimes it may just be one, sometimes it may be two, it may be multiple, right? So I want to get at least one to-do item. I will use the read operation to do that. Sorry, I just had power outage. So you have the U. U stands for update. So update is a scenario where you want to edit. So you want to edit the to-do items, you're going to use the update. Okay. Now, in a case where you want to delete an item, that's what the D stands for. So you're going to delete an item. All of these things have different kinds of requests that you can make. So an API permits you to make a request to the back end and receive a response. That's why I said it permits you to send and receive information or data, if you'd like to call it that. So in this basic example, what we are trying to do is we want to get information from the back end. And so in your database, you can use do that. There are technologies that permit you to do that. The most simple or basic of them is called the fetch API, or the fetch way of getting information from the back end. And this comes directly installed in your React app. You do not need to install any extra packages for you to use the fetch API. So with the fetch API, what you can do is you can perform what we call a GET request. A GET request permits you to read data from your API. The GET request permits you to read data from your API. So this is a basic example where I am fetching data. So I'm fetching, when I'm talking about data, in this case, I'm talking about the to-do items. So I'm fetching to-do items from the back end, which is provided to me through this route, which is an API route. Okay. So if we come to the code here, permit me skip some of the things where we have all of these states. I'm going to explain why we have some of these states here. But for now, what we are doing is, this is the function here. So we want to fetch to do items, okay? So since we want to fetch to do items, what do? We call the fetch API and say, get me all of the to-do items that are on this route. So if this route permits me to get to-do items, use this function to do so. That's exactly what this line of code says. And when you do that, if I just console.log what this gives, anyway, I don't need to console.log it because we already have it here on the app. If you can see the app, these are the items you are going to get. If I show you on the website, let me just pull up the website very quickly. You're going to see it here. So these are the to-do items. You see, this is the same route. You cannot see my screen. Oh. Please, can you see my screen now? I believe you should be able to see my screen now. All right, awesome. So if I copy this route, it's going to permit me to see or to fetch the to-do items. So these are the to-do items here. So by writing this, what I'm simply saying is fetch the to-do items that are provided via this route. And then this dot then, what it does is it says that when you perform this action of the fetch, it's going to give you the response when it gets it. So it may not be able to get it immediately, but what's sure is that it's going to try to get it. And so if it tries to get it and then it succeeds, then it should return the response. That is what this line of code says. So fetch the to-do items via this API route, and if you succeed to get it, then return the response. So this is like, as it is written in English, it literally means that in JavaScript as well. So when you fetch it, then if you succeed to get it, then return a response. So this action actually returns a promise, right? That is why we use .then to be able to return the response. And why are we returning response.json? We are returning response.json because this actually returns a JSON object. As you can see here, this is a JSON object. But because we are writing in JavaScript or TypeScript, we need to convert that response into a JavaScript object. That is why we are returning response.json and not just response, okay? Now, in response.json, which is a JavaScript object, there is the parameter which is called data, and data is what we actually need. So that is why we are console.logging data here. So data is going to be these IDs like this. It's going to be all of this, just this, without the array and all of that. Do you get it? So data is an array of all of these objects instead of a JSON object. So what we are interested in this response.json, maybe I should just console.log it so that it actually makes sense. So if I come here and I say in this function, let me just comment this out. So if I say it should do this, so in my console, just permit me pull it up here. Sorry, my server was static here. So if I were to, let me just save again so that it's going to reinitialize. It's going to reinitialize it. So if you can see my console here, so these are the to-do items, to-dos. These are the to-do items here. So that's what response, this is what data does. So if we don't do this .then data, and then we just console.log the response, you're going to see, so let me just comment this out. And then if I say console.log response.json, so if you look at this here, you see, it looks funny, right? We have all of this H, I, J, funny stuff here, right? So to get just these to-dos, which is what we have up here, right? To get just this part without all of this H, I, J, funny stuff, that is why we do the data. That's why we fetch the data object from it. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So all of this H, I, J, blah, 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 all of that is the data object. So because we want just the to-dos from it, that's why we are getting this. So we are doing response. If we do response.json, it gives us that. So from the response.json, so if I put .data here, it wouldn't work because this is a promise. Yeah. So we're going to have to get it with .then. So let me just do that again so that you understand. And if I hover, it says property data does not exist on type promise any. Why? Because this is a promise. So at this point in time, we don't yet have .data. So I'm answering the question which you may have of, but why can we not just put .data here? The reason why we cannot put .data here is because at this point in time, we don't yet have the .data. In fact, the right way to say it is that we are not sure if there is a .data on this response.json. The only way for us to be sure is that we need to wait for the promise to actually finish. Like we need to wait for the fetch to actually fetch the data. And then when it's done fetching the data, we need to wait to see if there's a data object in it. That is why we are doing another .then here to actually get the data object. Okay, now this syntax is actually confusing for a lot of people, which is why in modern JavaScript, it is recommended that you use async await. It is recommended that you use async await because async await is much more readable, it's much more understandable. Async await is much more readable, much more understandable. So if you come here, this syntax with .then, this is the same thing written with async await. So .then actually does exactly the same thing as async await, just that async await is much more legible, is much more easy to understand. So if you, this same thing written in async await says that the first thing is we are going to first wait to fetch for the data, right? So we fetch for the data and wait to have a response. That is why we are doing constant the response. So we are assigning the information that we are going to get from this call to response. And if we get that data, we are now going to also assign the data that we are going to get from response.json because response.json also returns a promise. That is why we also have another await here. So we have two awaits because this fetch action returns a promise. So we have to wait for that promise to resolve. That's the technical term that is used. For the promise to resolve means that we need to wait until there is an answer or a response from the backend. Once we have that response from the backend, we are going to save it in the response variable. Once we've had the response variable, we have to also wait to convert that response into a JavaScript object. That is what response.json actually does. So response.json converts that response which we have had as a JSON object into a JavaScript object. If the fetch is not successful, someone asked the question, if the fetch is not successful, what happens? We are able to know if we are using async await, if the response is, if the fetch is not successful. And so we'll be able to handle that error. So if you look at my code here, for example, with async await, it is very nice because you are possible to use try catch blocks to make sure that whenever it does not succeed, you can actually do something. So here, what I can do is I can actually write something like try. So I can say try to do all of this and then catch. So I can catch an error here. So what this means is try to do all of this. Let me just send this inside. So try to do all of this. This set loading just says set, like we should know that I have started fetching the information. So that's what set loading means, for us to know when the fetch has started, okay? So we start the fetch. Once we've started the fetch, we wait for the response, right? That's what the first line does. Once we wait for the response and there is a response, we now wait to convert that response into a JavaScript object. That is what we are going to assign to data. Once we assign that to data, we also want to have it in our state. And I'm going to come to the part where I explain the state. When I explain all of these basic concepts, the part about doing the app is going to be faster because once you understand the fundamentals, it's just building the app now. Okay? So if I try to do all of this and it fails, that is why I have this catch block. The catch block is going to get the error. And this console.log permits me to know what the error is. And when I log the error, I'm going to see it in my console. And then it's going to tell me what the error is. Then I can know how to handle the error. So if the error is maybe a network error, I'm going to be able to know that, okay, this is a network error. And whenever there is a network error, so I can say if, let's say the error is a network error. Of course, you will not write your JavaScript code with English, right? There is a way to know when the error is a network error using what we call status codes. There are some stuff we call status codes, but I think that's more advanced for this particular course. But through the status codes, you'll be able to know whether it's a network error or it's a server error or it's an error with your code or something like that, okay? If that error is this, then do this. If that error is this, then do this. So that's how you handle the errors using a try-catch block, okay? But this is, like I said, a little bit more advanced for this course, which is why I did not include it in the code. But as you learn and you implement your own solutions, you're going to handle that. Okay, so let me close this for now. I think I have too many things open. I think I've been able to touch on this. So there are multiple HTTP methods for you to be able to consume information from an API. Remember, I already explained this. I said you can create, right? So CRUD, always remember CRUD, C-R-U-D, CRUD. So create is when you want to add an item. So you are going to use a post request to add an item or to add a new to-do item. In the case of the app we are building, if I want to add a new to-do item, I'll use the post request. Okay, so APIs, you have post request, you have get request. Get request is when you want to read. When you want to read, you use a get request. So you get data from the back end. Update. For update, you can use either of two requests. So you can either use a put request or you can use a patch request. Remember I said I was going to share my notes with you. I think when you go through it, it makes more sense. So for a put request is when you want to replace the entire resource. So in this case for our app, the entire resource is the to-do item. So if I want to replace the entire to-do item, I'm going to use a put request. But if I want to replace just a part of the to-do item, I'm going to use a patch request. Based on who is designing your backend, they may use a post request as well. So it depends on how they want to achieve it, right? Again, like I said, as you build apps, you're going to figure out what should work best for the particular use case. And then when you want to delete, of course, you use the delete request. The 5 different HTTP methods that are necessary for things. API, you have request, you perform a request using it means item. Depending on who's building your back end, it may differ. Okay. If you want to update, that is edit. If you want to edit an item, you could use either a put request. A put request will be used when you want to edit the entire item. You could use a patch request. A patch request can be used when you want to edit just part of the item. For example, if you want to mark your to-do item as complete, it would be very great for you to use the patch request because you're not editing the entire to-do. You're only editing the mark. You're only editing the status of that to-do item, whether it has been done or not. That's what we mean by mark as complete. If you're marking as complete, it means it has been done. Then you also have the get request. The get request is when you want to fetch data from a particular API. Remember, you only perform requests to APIs using what we call API routes. So the API here is actually the dummy.json.com/todos. So this is the API route. This is what we call the API route. This is the main API routes. Now, based on the request you are performing, there is a documentation for this API. There is actually a documentation for this API that tells you which route to use when you want to perform a particular request. So if I'm performing a post request, for example, I'm not going to use this exact same route. If I'm performing a get request, this is the route to use. If I'm performing a put request, it may not be this exact same route. So as we dive into the code, you're going to see that now. So I suggest, because of time and so that we should not just do theory, let's get into the practical. So the first part of the work that we want to do, I believe everyone can see my screen now, right? If it's necessary, I can just zoom in again one more time. Let me just close this. Okay, so this is the app we want to build. I want to explain to you how I built this. The first thing that is important for us to learn is that there are actually to-do items that already exist in the database, right? So the first thing that we want to do here is we want to display all of these to-do items that you already see here. So how did I get all of these to-do items that we already see here? What I did was I wrote a function that permits me to fetch, using a get request, all of the to-do items that already exist in the database. And remember, I said there are two ways to fetch the request. There are two ways to fetch funds or data, sorry. So you can either use .then, because this API returns a promise. And whenever API returns a promise, you must use either .then or you use async, right? And I said the industry standard nowadays is to use async await. That is why I am using async await in this code. But if you use .then, there is absolutely no problem with that. In as much as you know how to use it, that's fine. But I advise you to use async await because I said promise, Lady, the second one, a promise, to promise somebody. So the promise says that, yes, I have heard you. You have told me to fetch information. I'm going to try to fetch it, and then I'll tell you later when I get the response. That is why we are awaiting. So this await says, wait for the response. We have told fetch to fetch the response for us. So wait for him to fetch the response and then tell you. So it's an asynchronous request, And asynchronous requests return promises. So what I do is I have a state. So state permits us to manage states of the application. Sorry that I'm using the word to define the word, but I don't see any better way to say it than that. So the state of an application is the particular state in which it is at this moment. So the word state was used intentionally to tell you that this is the state at which this application is at the moment. So initially, so if I comment this out, so if I just comment this out. So initially, I want to refresh this. Okay. All right, let me just set to those to be null. So it will be very helpful if I do it this way. It's going to make sense. Okay, voila, this is perfect. So initially, if you look at this app, it's a bare bones app. There are no to-do items, right? There are absolutely no to-do items. But I know, because I've been able to see from the documentation of the API, that there are to-do items that already exist in the database. And the purpose for this app is I want to be able to display all of the to-do items that are in the database. And then so that the user sees his to-do items, and then I give the possibility to the user to add a new to-do item. Okay, that's the purpose of this app. So the functional requirements are the user should see the to-do items that already exist. The user should be able to add a new to-do item. The user should be able to edit a to-do item that already exists, and the user should be able to delete a to-do item that already exists. Those are the 4 main functional requirements. And if time permits, we're going to add the option to delete a to-do item, or to mark as complete, to mark a to-do item as complete. All right, so the state permits us to know how this application is at the moment. So here I have defined the first state, which is called to-dos, okay? So to-dos is the variable or state that is going to store all of the to-do items in my app. So when I fetch those to-do items from the API, where am I going to store them? I am going to store them in this to-dos state, okay? So that's why we have this to-do state here. So in this function where I have the fetch to-dos, this is my function to fetch all of the to-dos in the database. So what did I do? I first of all set loading. What set loading means is I am starting to fetch the to-do items now. So I am using this for my user experience because I want the user to know that I am fetching the to-do items right now. That is why I am using this state. So we have the loading state. The loading state permits us to know whether we are fetching information from the database right now. That is what we are using the loading state for, okay? So this is for user experience. It's still possible to not use the loading state, but your user experience will not be good because the user will not know that you are currently fetching information, okay? So I set loading to be true, meaning that I have started fetching information. Now, what is the action that actually fetches that information? It is, let me uncomment this so that it's clear enough to read. So I have told fetch to get all of the to-do items that are on this route, okay? So how did I know that this is the route to get to-do items? It is in the documentation. So this is the documentation right here. This is the documentation right here. So it says, if you want to get all to-dos, this is the route to get all to-dos. Again, I said I'm going to share this with you guys. So if you want to get a single to-do, this is the route to get a single to-do. If you want to add a new to-do, this is the route to add a new to-do. You see, so everything is clearly written here. You don't need to guess it, okay? Now, let's move ahead. So I have told fetch, get all of the to-do items that are on this route. Now, why do I have this await here? I have this await here because this fetch is actually going to return a promise, okay? So this await is so that I can be able to wait until I have a response. So I wait until I have a response. Now, why is it important for you to use asynchronous request? Why is it important for you to use? Because there are two kinds of requests. You can either do a synchronous request or an asynchronous request. Asynchronous requests are important because they permit your user to be able to do other things with your app, even when data is being fetched in the background. So your app does not wait for one thing before other things can happen. For example, if by opening this app, I'm supposed to fetch the user balance, I'm supposed to fetch all of the users to-do items. So those are two things that are supposed to happen, right? If I'm using synchronous requests, what will happen is that I have to first of all wait. I must fetch the user's balance and completely fetch it before I can fetch all of the users to-do items. But that is not the behavior that I want. So the behavior I want is that While I am fetching for the user's balance, I should also be able to fetch the user's to-do list. Okay? That is why I use an asynchronous request. So in this case, await helps us to fetch the data and wait for the promise before we assign it to the response. Now we have gotten the response. The only problem is that the response is not in a format that we can use in JavaScript. Okay? So we decide to convert that response, which is a JSON object, into a JavaScript object. That is what this response.json does. It converts the JSON object into a JavaScript object. That procedure is also an asynchronous procedure, which is why we have attached the await here as well. So when we now convert this information into a JavaScript object, we assign it to the data variable. Because we want our code to be clean, that is why we have this second line, okay? Because it is very much possible to just come and say await res.json. Then when we assign it here, we just take this and add it here without having to write an extra line of code. But if you want your code to be clean, it is easier and better to do it this way. Some people even go to length to even extract to-dos from here. And then they just come here and attach to-dos like this. That is also very much okay. All right, that is also very much okay. So based on the way that your coding standard, but this is much more explainable. That is why I decided to write it this way. So what we are doing here is we have now had all of the to-dos that are in the database. So we are assigning it to this our state, which is supposed to store the to-dos. That's what we are doing. And then we finally set loading to be false. Setting loading to be false means that we are finished getting the to-dos. So you should tell the user that it is done, the procedure is done. How do we ensure that when the user opens the app, that action actually happens? It is by using the use effect hook. What the use effect hook says is that whenever this app mounts, as this page mounts, make sure you fetch the to-dos. That's what this line of code simply means. The use effect hook is used whenever you want to perform an action when the app mounts. When the app mounts means when the app actually boots and shows to the user. Okay, so when the app boots and shows to the user, fetch the to-do items using this function. So we are simply calling all of these actions here. Okay, so if I now save this file, you see that I have a feedback there. I don't know if maybe it was very fast, so maybe some people did not see it. But yeah, because of time, I'll just move ahead. So there was a feedback there that showed loading with a spinner, right? That is exactly what that's why we have this state to set loading. And this is the code that actually implements that. This is the code here. So I've said if the loading state is true, return this item. So it shows the spinner and then it shows the user that is loading to those. As soon as that action is done, it actually sets loading to be false. So because loading is now false, this other line of code gets to be implemented, or this other chunk of code gets to be implemented, which is the code that actually displays everything that we see here in the app, which is to-do app and all of this, okay? So that is it for the GET request. That is it for the GET request. That is how you fetch information from the back end. I see I still have 6 minutes, so I'm just going to explain one more thing. So all I'm literally doing here is I have fetched all of the information from the back end. So this one now is just JSX, which I believe that is not very complex. So I just have a flat list here, which is a list of items, which is what you use to display a list of items. And I have a component here, which is my to-do item. This is it in this app. And all I'm doing is I'm displaying a view with a text input, this text input here, which is what you see here. And then what I'm saying is if the user, no, I'm going to come to this part. So all I have here is I'm displaying this to-do item. I'm displaying this to-do item, and then I display the edit button. So I commented out some things because of time so that the app should not look too cluttered. But I can share this code with you if you would want later on so that you can advance and understand better. But that's it for getting the information. Now I have 5 more minutes, so I'm going to do one more thing, which is to edit. So, or no, to add a to-do item. So I have now gotten all of the to-do items and I have displayed them, but I have a text input here that permits me to add a to-do. So this button initiates the add to-do function. And what does the add to-do function do? What does the add to-do function do? This is the add to-do function. So literally this text input says, so you can add a to-do item, right? So I have new to-do, and then whenever I type here, I am taking what I have typed inside here and adding it or setting it or assigning it to the to-do, the new to-do variable, which is why I have this set new to-do here. So that is what this state is for, this state of new to-do. So the state new to-do simply is to store anything that I type inside this text input. So if I say, this is the React Native course for the bootcamp. Okay, so what the add to do function, this is just a button that performs an action. Okay, so when I click on this button, it's supposed to call the add to do function. So what the add to do function says is simple. If the information that has been pasted or that has been typed here is empty, that is what this line says. So if I check the new to do state and it is empty, I should just go away. Like I should do nothing. I should do nothing. So if I cut this out, and then I press, or even if I press space, and I press add to do, you see it does nothing, right? Because this function has been executed and it sees that what the user has typed here is empty. So it returns, it does nothing, okay? Now, the next line is, this is just assigning an initial to-do item. Okay, so this is just assigning an initial to-do item. So what I am doing here is setting to-dos. So I should probably skip this for now. I think it's a bit complex. Maybe I shouldn't have written this like this. But let me just explain what I'm doing here. So remember, this add to do is just text, right? This add, please, I am going to beg for 5 extra minutes to complete this this part. So this to-do item has a particular shape in which it must be for you to be able to add it to the back end. When I talk about shape, I'm saying that the to-do is not just the text. So if you see here, do something nice for someone you care about, that's the text of the to-do, right? But that to-do item does not only have the text. The to-do item actually has 4 fields. So you have the ID. Every to-do item must have an ID. The ID is the unique identifier of the to-do item, okay? Then it has the to-do itself, which is the text. It has another variable completed, which says whether the to-do has been completed or not, right? And then it has the last item, which is the user ID. The user ID is the person who is adding that to-do, okay? And in our case, for simplicity, we are saying that it is the first user, so the user with the ID 1, who is adding all of the to-do items. Normally in your app, you're supposed to have a login part where when the user logs in, you'll be able to know their user ID, and then that is what you will add here. The ID that we are adding here is date.now, but normally it wouldn't be like this. Maybe you have another function to assign IDs to your to-do items. So this ID is the unique identifier. It is what you use, like the ID card of every to-do item, okay? And then you have the to-do itself, which is text, which is what we are going to type in here. Then you have this completed variable, which says whether the to-do has been completed or not. By default, when you're adding a to-do item, we are setting completed to be false because you cannot be adding a to-do item and then it is already completed, right? So that's why we're setting it to be false. Then the user ID, like I said, we have just put it for simplicity's sake to always be that it is the user number 1 who is adding all of the IDs. So this next line of code simply says that take this new to-do item that you are adding and add it to the list of to-dos. Take this new to-do item that you are adding and add it to the list of to-dos. So if I have this, if I paste this here, I think I've pasted it twice. So if I paste this here, and I tap on add to do, when I say it should add it to the list of to-dos, it means that when I add my to-do, it should show here. It should show among the list of to-dos here. That's what it means. It should show among the list of to-dos here. Now, for other apps, what some people do, because sometimes it's necessary, is that you refetch the information. So what that means is that when you add a new to-do, you should actually perform another get request. So you should now come and call fetch to-dos again to fetch the list of to-dos. But that is going to be memory intensive or server usage intensive, which is not necessary for this app. So that's why we're just doing it locally here. Okay. So what this simply says is take all of the to-dos that were first of all there and make sure you put them back in the to-dos list together with the new to-do that we have added. And so if this succeeds, set the new to-do to be empty. If this succeeds, set the new this line of code and how to add it to do. So I said when you type in the to-do here, it is saved in the new to-do state. And this is the line of code that actually performs that saving. It is this part. So it says on change text, set new to-do. What this does is it takes the text that the user has typed in this text input and actually saves it in this new to-do variable. So when we come here in this add to-do, and we have here that the to-do should be this new to-do, this new to-do actually contains the text that the user has typed in that text input. Okay, so remember, even though we have saved this to-do in the state, we have not yet saved it in the back end. We have not yet uploaded it to the database through the API endpoint. So we have to do that. That is why we have this line of code. And I believe this will help the person who asked about how do you handle errors. Okay. So what we are saying is try this. Wait for the fetch API to add this to-do item to the back end. That is what all of this line of code is doing. So here we have the endpoints. Remember I said you have APIs have endpoints, or you can call them routes. So APIs have endpoints to perform certain requests. So most times the endpoints that you will use to perform your post request may not be the same endpoint that you use to perform your get request, but all of them have the same, usually they have the same base URL. And if you look at the base URL is dummy.json.com/todos. All of the endpoints have dummy.json.com/todos. So in this case, /add has added to this. Okay. All of this is spelled out in the documentation of the API. So I think there was someone who asked about, will you always need to refer to the documentation of the API? Yes, you should refer to the documentation of the API because the documentation of the API will tell you how to use the API. If you're working closely with a back-end engineer, they may not need to give you the documentation because they will explain it to you directly. But most times, in most companies, in most scenarios, in most projects, you are going to have an API documentation. Okay, so in this case, we are performing what? A post request. The reason why we do not include a method here is because by default, when you don't include a method for the fetch API, it understands that you are trying to do a get request. Okay, so whenever you're trying to do a get request, it may not be necessary for you to include the method. But here we are including the method because we are doing a post request. If you don't include this method, it's going to assume that you're doing a get request and then it will not work. Do you understand? So here we have what we call headers. So API requests have a particular structure that you follow based on how the API was built. But usually most REST APIs require headers, they require bodies, and they require methods. Okay, so here in this case, we have the post request as the method. Remember, I explained to you 5 different methods for HTTP requests. You have post, get, patch, put, delete. Okay, those are the 5 different methods for HTTP requests. Now, for the headers, we may not be able to go into details now, but there are different kinds of headers. Here, we are just saying that the content type that is expected for this endpoint is that it should be a JSON request. Okay, so the information or the data that you are passing to this endpoint should be in the form of JSON data. There are other kinds of content types. You can have multi-part form data. You can have text. There are other types. As we explore APIs, you learn more about that. Okay. You can also have other information that you pass to the header. For example, if you are building a login page, usually you may not pass in a header, but once the user has logged. Okay, I should repeat. So I said there are 5 main kinds of methods for HTTP requests because there are different kinds of APIs. So if you're working with a REST API, usually you will use the HTTP protocol to make your requests. So if you are using the HTTP protocol to make your requests, there are 5 main kinds of methods you can use. Number 1 is if you're creating or you're adding, so you're going to use the post request. If you are reading information from the backend or the database, you are going to use the GET request. If you are updating information, you can either use the PUT request or the PATCH request. And if you are deleting information from the database, you use the DELETE request. All of these are well explained in the notes, which I'll send to you later. Okay? So I was saying that for the headers, if you are building an application that requires authentication and authorization, you will need to pass header parameters. An example of a header parameter will be the authorization token that authorizes that user to be able to perform certain actions in the app. For example, in the Fapshi app, there is a login page. And when the user logs in, we need to know which user has logged in whenever he's trying to perform an action. We need to also know whether that user has the rights to perform that action. The way we do that is that we pass in a header parameter which we assign the attribute authorization. So the header parameter in this case is a token which we pass to the backend, and that token tells us whether that user is authorized to perform that action or not. Okay, so details about that you're going to see it in more advanced courses or as you get to implement real life solutions. The body is simply the information you are passing to the back end. So in this case, it is this optimistic to do, which is what we have here. Or you can just call this maybe the to do to act or something like that. The way you name it is up to you. So we have this to do item here. And why are we using JSON.stringify? It's because remember this optimistic to do is a JavaScript object. This is a JavaScript object. But we have said here that this endpoint expects the data to be in the form of JSON. And so if the data is supposed to be in the form of JSON, we have to convert this optimistic to do, which is a JavaScript object, into a JSON object. That is why we are using JSON.stringify. And remember, when we want to get that data, it is going to be a JSON object, and we use res.json to convert it to a JavaScript object because JavaScript is what we are writing our code in. I hope that's clear enough. So in this catch block literally says that if we try to do all of this and it does not work, if it does not work, we should therefore do this. So catch is going to work in the scenario where there is no success. So it means in this case, there was an error. Maybe the user did not have network. We were not able to reach the server. There are many reasons, right? So what we do is we are going to remove this optimistic to do, which we had initially added to the to-do list. We are going to remove this optimistic to do, which we had initially added to the to-do list here. Another thing which we can do is we can actually also set new to do to be the new to do. So what this means is in this case, because we want to give the user a particular user experience, right? So we want the user to feel like they have already added their to do. That's why we are doing this. So immediately I click on add to do here. You see it adds that item to the to-do list. This is it here. It adds the item to the to-do list. Okay. Now, in this case, it stays in the to-do list because this other action has actually succeeded. But if this action did not succeed, what would have happened would have been that it would remove this item from the to-do list, and then it would take back this text and put it here. So we are going to have something like this. And then this one will be removed. If I just permit me to put back the delete option. So I can delete. Oh, so add to do. So if I add, it succeeds, right? So what I was saying is this part of the function, what it does is if this did not succeed, right? It should remove it back and then save it back here. And then put it back inside this form. Oh, I've deleted it already. I copied something else. Okay, so that's what this will do. That's what this part will do. So that's how you add a to-do item. So let me just add another item. Let's say, thank God. Oh, let's say, thank God for Martin. Add to-do. So you see, it automatically shows here. Why? How does this happen that the app, you don't see anything happening like a glitch or anything? It's because we first of all add the item here before trying to initiate this. That's just for user experience. Other people would prefer to, add the item, and then when it succeeds, before they now do this. You see? So it's only when it succeeds that they will now do this. That's still okay. Some people prefer to do that. Okay. So that is it for what I had to share with you all. Again, because of time, we're not able to explore everything, but I'm going to share the code with you. You can actually go through the code and understand a bit more about it. So we've used about 18 more minutes of the question and answer time to to work on this. So thank you very much for your keen attention. Sir Martin, over to you. I think you're going to coordinate the question and answer session. Thank you. Engineer Martin, are you there? All right, all right. So does anyone have a question? If you have a question, please go ahead and ask your question. Yuan, yes, please go ahead. I don't know if you have rights to unmute your mic, but please go ahead. Just try. If you are not able to, then type in the chat.
Good evening, sir. Okay, my mic is working.
Awesome.
All right. First question. This is React Native. That's it, right? Because I have components like Home, TX, and To-Do item.
Oh, yes.
It's React Native. It's not React.
Yes, this is React Native. So this is a mobile app. It is not a website.
Okay. Now,
yes, and
I see you having different like functionalities, like the fetch, like the post, the get, and all the like. Could you separate them in different components too? Like get a separate component, or is it advisable or better to put everything in the home component?
All right. So these are requests. These are not components. So components are UI items. So you can say, for example, if you see here, I can create this text input to be a component of its own, right? Or I can take this section where I have the text input and the button, and then if I cut it, I can add a component here, and I can call it maybe add to do. So add to do, and then I'm going to pass it some props. And then I can now come here and create an add to do component and put this text input and the button into it. So components are UI items. They are not functionalities. So what you have mentioned are functionalities. So those are functions. And those functions cannot be separated into a component. However, they can be separated. I hope I answered your question, Bradley. So I said you can, but you should not create it as if it's a component, because components can only be UI elements. So only things that are here can be components. Like the to-do item, I created a component for it so that the code is clean. Imagine that I had all of this code in here, it would make it very cluttered, right? So all of this, it would be too much. So that's why I created a separate component for it so that the code is clean. But if you have functions, you cannot create as components. Is we barely have 7 minutes. Are there any other questions? So if you are building in React, it's going to be a similar thing, just that the syntax is going to change, right? Because you'll be writing React code, not React Native code. And these bottom tab navigators you see here, it's because this is actually the Fapshi app. I just replaced the home screen with this to show you an example without having to set up a whole new app. So that's why I do not have the time to remove all of this. So if you look at these are other functionalities in the Fapshi app. I just separated it to be able to show you. Yeah.
So it means we can say we have coded the Fapshi app during the bootcamp.
Yes, you can say that. Are there any other questions, please? If there are none, then I think we should call it today. If no one has a question, I really do hope that you at least have basic understanding of some of these things. Please make no mistake. What I've explained like this, you may feel like you have understood it, but you will never really understand it until you write the code. So do not assume that because you have now gone through the course I've given, you are fully fit to do something like this. You should actually practice on your own. So I'm going to send the code and the notes. I'll do my best to host the code on GitHub. I'm going to talk with Sir Martin on how we can do that. So I believe you're going to have the code if you deems it necessary, you have it, and I also send you the notes. However, you should make sure you practice. Actually, write the code yourself. Don't copy and paste the code. Try to do it on your own from start to finish. That is the only way you're going to learn. Also, avoid using AI as much as possible. I believe that Sir Martin would have expanded on this point, because at this point you don't yet have the expertise to be able to understand or really tell AI what AI should do. So what you should be doing is actually understand the concepts so much so that you get to the point of expertise where you are working with AI, not that you are learning from AI. AI is supposed to do what you want, not that you are doing what AI wants. Because that's what a lot of people do when they say they are vibe coding. So please try as much as possible to not just copy paste the code. The code is just there to give you guidance when you get stuck, or maybe you're trying to do something and you do not understand how it's supposed to be done. You can refer to the code to get a reference. However, you should be coding it on your own from start to finish. Even designing the components, you should design them on your own. I believe that's the best way for you to learn. So thank you all very much. If there are no questions, I'm going to hand the floor to Sir Martin. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so very much, Karl. Thank you, bro. I really, really, really appreciate you making out time from your schedule to impact the community. And I'm sure, like, with what I'm seeing, these guys, like, they're celebrating grace in the house. Guys, thank you so much for showing love. We really appreciate this time. We know it's not easy, especially now that it's a festive season. You could have been with your family and spending more time, but you decided to give in your, because it's not just these 2 hours. You have taken time to prepare hours ahead mentally, and structuring the code and preparing the content for us. We really appreciate, and we're hoping to see you during demo day, which is going to happen in March, because demo day, all of what they are learning currently, there will be projects that they're going to execute, and around March, early March, there will be a demo day so that you can be able to see that everything that you did, the training you did, they have been able to put it into practice. So, guys, thank you all. I will do well to compile the recording because I have it in patches since we had some network issues. We may not receive it this evening, but likely tomorrow we'll receive the recording. And like Engineer Karl said, please do well to try to test it out. To you they say practice makes permanent. It's the more you practice, the more you test out things, the better you become. You can read as many books as possible, you can watch as many tutorials as possible, but then until you start testing, that's when you know that, where you'll be able to determine whether you know what you're doing or not. And again, like you said, avoid using AI at this point. You can go to AI and tell AI that, oh, generate me a to-do list that uses an API, and it's going to give you a very beautiful code. But what's going to happen is you will not know how those things work. But then as you start trying it out and you're making mistakes, you will learn even more than the way you're going to use AI. You will use AI in the long run. Today, I actively use AI every single day because I already know what I'm doing. But at your level, you want to grab these basics. So with that, I'll say today we've come to the end of the session. Thank you to everyone, and let's have a great evening. Bye bye.